Hi, I'm Joe,
And I'm Ricky.
and this is the season 3, episode 13 beer and broadband podcast for September 14th, 2020. And we're back, after being gone for however long, 2 months, 3 months. I'm not sure because I didn't count. I didn't think to count. Do you know how long we've been gone, Ricky?
It's been about like 3 months, right?
Yeah, I think it's been 3 months. But we're back, and so we've got some stuff to talk about, some brewing topics. Um, Today's probably going to be mostly about brewing and maybe some of the projects we've been up to while we've been off. So let's just hop right into it. We are going to do one of the wines that I brewed over the well, I guess over the last year. But
Mm-hmm.
this one I brewed on um, sometime in I believe it was May. I think that's when I started it. I could double check real quick. Um, but it is a Pyment, and I bottled it in on the 1st of July. It ended up being about 13% ABV, and it used Lawven BM 4x4 for its um, yeast, which ended up I've been pretty happy with them. Now this one is a spiced one, so I put
Mm-hmm.
um, cinnamon and a little bit of clove, a lot of clove. Unfortunately,
Mm-hmm.
that's the you'll see what I meant by that in a minute. And I used some, of course, just grape juice. I didn't use anything else. And that was pretty much it. But I'm gonna look up on my brew sheet so I can say what day um, I did this. Um, so have you taken a first sip of it?
I have, yeah. I actually really like this. Like you're right. There's a lot of clove in this. It's like the predominant flavor.
I
It
should have
gives it
put
like.
like two in, and I put four in the
Well, I mean,
gallon that
here
I
I'm
made.
gonna say this though. I really like that. It gives it like a bit of a medicinal taste, but in the same sense that like things like Jägermeister are medicinal, right? Like that's not necessarily a bad thing
Hmm.
if the flavors complement each other. It's still got a little bit of sweetness left. You can taste a little bit of the cinnamon, mostly in the heat. But grape and cloves do not go bad together.
No, they do not.
I think last season we hit a lot of the things you made, and I had some critiques a lot of them. But this one, I mean, I really like. I'm going to finish this bottle. This is frankly really good. I like this.
Yeah, I think it ended up great. I'm not just the one thing that I'm like, oh, I did a little bit too much. I should have put two instead of four in a gallon. Um, but it was 1 pound of wildflower honey, so
Hmm.
raw wildflower honey. I don't remember the brand that I used. Yeah, well, back to the date. I did it on the 17th of May. So,
Okay. Yeah.
and then it's been, either aging or finished up its brewing. But it was 1 gallon of grape juice, some Earl Grey tea, cinnamon, like four whole cloves, raisins, and I added some 2 ounces of wrung oat chips in
Hmm.
the secondary on the on in June 7th. Um, so I'm pretty happy with it. I like the other one, the wine that I made 2 gallons of.
Hmm.
It's basically the same base, just it has one more gallon, one more. It's a pound of wildflower honey per gallon.
Hmm.
Um, it's the same everything except I didn't add as many. I didn't add any spices to it in
Gotcha.
the secondary. So, but it's oaked and everything, and they have different flavors. So we'll be able to talk about that a little bit. I think you'll like both of the these that I ended up making. I'm beginning to feel more confident. And the BM
Hmm.
4x4, I feel like it added a lot more um, fruity esters to
Yeah.
to it. So, well, so I started talking about it because I'm kind of nerdy on it, and I'm a little bit excited about it. I will shut up now, and you talk and tell me your opinion of it.
No, I mean it's really good. I think that I know this is one of those ones that had like a really long brew time, and I think that benefited it um, because when it takes that long, months and months for it to complete its brewing, it's really aging at the same time. Because the stuff that's already been produced is just sitting there. So I mean, realistically, this is like almost 5 months aged,
Mhm.
and it really is mellowed. I mean, it's almost 14%, but it doesn't really taste that high. I mean, it probably tastes closer to like 11%. And I don't know, I'm just digging the clove. Like I like things with a lot of flavor. Nothing here really conflicts with each other. Um, I don't know. I won't say it's the best thing we've ever made, but it's like in the top five. It's certainly the best thing that we've had since quarantine started, at least in my opinion. Um, this is something that I will absolutely drink the rest of it on, and I would be more committed to drinking it like in this podcast if it wasn't almost 14%, because I want to stay together for the whole thing. But
Yeah, I'm
no, this is
definitely not
really
gonna
good.
drink a whole 12-ounce bottle of this. It is it is way too much. Um, so yeah, I mean that it. I was surprised that it did it as well as it did. I feel like I'm getting a little bit better every time.
Hmm.
I know that we talked about the sweet apple wine that I made last time, and it was fairly dry. Um, but I've like the more it's aged, the better that one's got also,
Hmm.
almost like this one. And you have to back sweeten it. So that is one of the topics that we have today, but I'm just going to go ahead and address that. Um, when we were talking about it before, I didn't back sweeten it or anything like that, but I knew I needed to.
Hmm.
So like when I remake that, after I let it go dry, my methodology for back sweetening would be to add about 20 points of sugar to it,
Hmm.
probably brown sugar, because that adds like a kind of caramel note to it, and I really think that's nice with apple. Um, that's what my plan is for the next wine that I make off that recipe to be.
Yeah, I can definitely see that being really nice. Yeah, even just that little bit of sweetness does it just helps bring out other notes.
Mhm.
Like it's not necessarily just the sweetness. It's like you can taste more things because it's a little bit sweeter.
Yeah, exactly. Um, so what? Well, I made a coffee mill yesterday,
Hmm.
um, and we went back and forth talking about that, and you've got some opinions about this. I'd like for you to get your opinions out, like your thoughts out, even though there may be like a little bit of criticism on my decisions on this, because I gave you the like we talked about it like via Discord and
Hmm.
a couple times. So what are your thoughts on it?
So my thoughts, if I was going to make a coffee melt, is because normally time, when you make something with coffee, you're either putting in beans or you're doing cold brew or espresso powder. Did a lot of research on that when we were kind of talking about it. I do think cold brew is probably the way to go. You normally have to dilute that anyway by about 50% if you make it with like standard strength. So I'm thinking half cold brew, half water and honey. Combine those in, make it a lower ABV, like 6 to 8%, maybe as high as 10, and aim to not really age it. Because from my research, even like commercially produced and sanitized cold brew only stays like in its peak performance, its peak freshness for about 6 months. So that's like right at the tail end of like where you would let something over 8%, but like less than 10 kind of sit. Because, just as I said with the wine, I like a lot of flavor in what I'm drinking. So I don't want it to have like muted coffee tones. I want really powerful, really fresh coffee tones.
So I put it together yesterday. It has about 3.5 pounds of honey in it for a a gallon,
Hmm.
um, and that puts it at about 13%.
Hmm.
So I don't know what's going to end up happening with that. Could be bad, could be good. We'll see. I used some of the um, ideas from one of the um, from one of the channels that I've watched. So I looked at man-made mead and city steading, and then I did a lot of research on my own, like
Hmm.
read articles and things like that. And while I'm normally cool with, you know, doing something like someone else did, I'm more wanted to know, like, what is the kind of facts around it.
Hmm.
And some of the things I found contradict some of the things that you say. So since this is an experiment, I just decided I was only going to do 1 gallon. So 100 grams of coffee and quarts of water to make the cold brew. And I used a medium roast coffee from Starbucks. It's Pikes Peak is the one that I normally just drink for my um, whatever. It's, like I said, 3.5 pounds of mead and 2 quarts of water to kind of dilute the cold brew, and then I put in some yeast hulls in it to give it a little bit of extra nutrient.
Hmm.
But I didn't add any yeast nutrient. I might throw some yeast nutrient in it when I go to check it next week, just because it really hasn't started up today, where all the other brews that I made yesterday really started going. I made uh, 5 things yesterday. I made a
Hmm.
regular apple cider, a hibiscus apple cider. Well, really, it's going to be a wine, a Coffeemel, and a uh, let's see, Coffeemel banana wine. Um, so and a strawberry wine. So we'll see how that ends up turning out. I don't know how whether it'll be, um, any of it'll be good or bad. Um, but yeah, so for the coffee mill, I went down a little bit more like what City Steading did, because like when Man Made Mead, they did their thing. They used coffee grounds and some espresso powder and like some of the other things. But the big one was like they brewed their coffee, and
Yeah.
that just made it like even like a year later, the guy was like, "Oh, this is just it's terrible. I've been letting it sit for a while, like to kind of mellow out, and it won't mellow." He added more, sugar, honey to it to make it more palatable, I guess, and it didn't end up being that great. So we'll see how it turns out. I'm hoping that it will be good. Hoping.
Yeah, I mean, I think City Setting did not have a bad recipe. They just had some poor execution. Um, I think the lack of any nutrients really hit them on that one. Because you don't have to do that for a lot of things. Like this Pyment, you don't ever need really nutrients for that unless you're really trying to do the brew quick, because the juice has nutrients. But coffee, like the cold brew, is not going to have anything the yeast can eat apart from just the sugar and the honey. There's trace amounts of vitamins and other chemicals they need to really be healthy. So when you're not going to give them that in the additives, like you're not putting in juice or, whole fruit for them to kind of latch onto, just got to give them something to eat. Um, and I think I kind of called in the first video before they drank it, like, well, it's going to take a long time to finish if it finishes, and it's going to be hot because it's going to stress it. And they opened it up. Exactly what happened. It didn't complete as much as they wanted to. And they kind of said, "Oh, it's almost like it's got the stuff of peppers." Like that's heat because you stress the yeast.
Well, yeah,
So,
but after in the third video, it turned out being like exactly what they wanted it to.
I mean, I watched all three, and in their third video is when they said, this had the heat. It didn't really finish.
No,
You know,
they in the final video they did another one after that. Or the last video that they did or
mhm.
whatever. The
Yeah. I
coffee
mean,
melt
I watched
actually.
that one. They said that they're happy where it went, but their comments were, it didn't get as high as we wanted. It ended early, and he said that's okay, and that is okay for stuff. You know, But then they hit on the man. This really reminds us of the one we made with peppers because of how hot it is, and they were happy with it. Like they liked it. But if you in video one can say, "Well, I know how this is going to turn out," because you've got your recipe off a little bit, then that's exactly what they got. Whether or not you like it, that's all subjective. But you can't deny that the reason it has those characteristics wasn't by chance.
I get what you're saying. I guess I took away something slightly different, and maybe I need to go back and rewatch that. But like what I got um, from what they were saying is that the this thing turned out the way that they wanted it to, but it took age to make that happen. And they go for a more like natural brew, where we don't necessarily always do those things. Like you and I, um, you know, I've been experimenting with using without using and with using yeast nutrients, with using without using, other things. And so, like using raisins in tea. Um, I tend to find that that works really well for me and what I'm doing, but it doesn't like it takes a lot longer for my stuff to brew, right? Than some of the other things that we've done, where like in a week or two, a lot of those things can often be finished, right?
Yeah, but that's kind of my exact point, though. Raisins have nutrients. Like even if you're not putting in like a nutrient powder, which is generally just like ground up grains and stuff like that, you're putting something in that give the yeast food,
Hmm.
and that's kind of it. It doesn't really matter what the source is. If you're going to use specially formulated stuff or just natural whatever fruit you have around the house, you know, it's got to have something to eat if it's going to get to a high ABV. If you're going to throw it in there, it's only going to brew for like a week and a half because it's only getting to 6%. Doesn't matter as much. But when you're hitting those, you know, 10, 12, 14, the stuff you normally age, if you don't give it something, it's not generally going to get that high, which I think is where theirs landed. It landed at about 10%, and they were aiming for 12. Just because if you don't have enough food in there for it, even if they've got the sugar, it's just like people, you can give us a whole bunch of, just like pure fat, one of our most efficient energies. But if we don't have vitamins, then eventually, things aren't going to turn out well for us.
Um, I mean I agree with that. That's one of the reasons I've been trying to find some things that will help to improve the way that my brews have been going. So trying to make and especially right now, add more than just raisins.
Mm-hmm.
In the last batch of brews that I did, that fruit punch mead, I put like actual fruit in it. I um, dropped some spices in it and things like that. And I've got it in secondary, and I'm probably going to drop some. And I also oaked it for 2 weeks, and it probably after it finishes, I'm probably going to back sweeten it a little bit because it's got a fairly nice fruity flavor, but it's got like some real lemon overtones to it because I put some lemon and limes in it, and I want to see if I can tone that down some by bringing out some of the sweetness. But otherwise, it's got like nice characteristics. I might also throw some spices in there because I think
Mm-hmm.
it would lend well to that wine or that mead. But I mean, all to say that I think that's where I differ from them on stuff. Like I'm willing to, throw some extra stuff in if it's going to help the process. Um, but I don't know. Like one of the things that I do um, like in their kind of methodology is just let it get done. Let the yeast get done with whatever it's going to do. It doesn't matter if it takes 5 months or 6 months. Just let it do whatever. And this isn't a criticism on City State. If we're lucky enough that Brian and Derica ever listen to our show, or the dude from from Man Made Meat ever listen to our show, we're definitely not hating on, or at least I'm not hating on their stuff. I don't think you are either.
No, yeah.
Yeah. So just more, they've got some good ideas. I think just some of their stuff. They're learning just as much as I am. I think in some areas, which is pretty cool. Um,
Yeah, I like a lot of the way they do things. If they were, I'm sure they do so. I haven't watched enough of their videos, but I watched a couple more after I watched the ones for the Coffeemel. The approach they take, I think, really works well when you start doing things with like wild yeast. When you don't want to use packaged, which I'm just going to take a bunch of fruit. I'm not going to sanitize it. Going to condense it all down, let it brew in that. Because that's a lot of the methodology you have to follow. When it is a non-commercial strain of yeast, just give it what time it needs because it's just in the wild, just like anything else. The only reason I push back on that for, commercially available yeast is these things are selectively bred to be in certain conditions. And that includes how long they're brewing. So the more you take them outside of their ideal temperature or brew time or alcohol percent, the the worse those yeast are going to perform because they're just a tool in this process, you know. Like they're just one more ingredient that kind of has to be handled with care. Just like, if you go out and you buy like the cheapest, 100 additives juice you can get, you're not going to get as good a product because you're using one of your tools. You got a bad tool. Well, with these commercial ones, you have amazing tools, but if you don't use them right, you're not going to get a product as good as it could be, you know?
Yeah, I get what you're saying. I think maybe you should watch some more of their of like what they're doing and what their methodology is because I think they're like some of the stuff that you've watched might have been closer to the early stuff that they did, where they were just beginning to learn. I mean, definitely that coffee mill was out there at the beginning, but maybe there's also like a difference because their results kind of say something different than what you're saying right now, at least from my understanding of what they're getting from them, and some of the things that I've done, where like because so like I always sanitize everything, right?
Hmm.
If I'm using fruit, I cook it to a certain extent, maybe not like cook, but I at least heat it up or do something that's gonna sanitize it.
Hmm.
Pour some alcohol over it, like a whiskey or a rum or something.
Yeah, something like
Um,
that, or even the stuff like the Sandstar you clean your stuff with.
yep,
That's safe, so you can dunk it in things like that. That's what
drop
I'll
drop stuff
generally
in there.
do.
Yeah.
Uh, just because you can cook them, and I know some people do, but the idea of that is you're getting it hot enough to kill the bacteria, which is still hot enough to change the sugars in the fruit. Because when you heat sugar up, it inverts, so it changes into a different sugar type, and you lose some of those fruit
Well,
flavors.
that's really what I want whenever I'm cooking it though. So like with the bananas, I for the banana wine I made, and we'll talk about that later. Like part of the process, I cooked some of the bananas. I left the other ones uncooked, and I mashed them all up, and then I dropped them in there because I'm hoping to get some of those converted sugars into it, kind of like a kind of like a toasted banana, like a bananas Foster kind of flavor.
Yeah,
Um,
but that's not really what inverted sugars are. So when a sugar inverts, it basically changes to just a different, not like a different flavor of sugar, but an entirely different chemical combination that you can just buy. Like if you invert apple, it's the same thing as if you invert table sugar. Um, and that's kind of the reason you want to avoid it sometimes is because what makes something taste like banana or apple, a lot of that is in the unique combination of the sugar in them, which you lose if you heat them up. It's kind of like why, you know, when you bake an apple, if you bake it too much, it essentially just kind of becomes a sweet mush. It doesn't have the apple. But if you heat it, enough that it's soft inside but hasn't torn down all of the core sugars, it still tastes like apple.
so let's take apple for example. Example. So let's suppose that I want to have a caramel apple kind of flavor, and it's specifically something that's closer to like a baked apple pie. I might want to cook the apple chunks that I put inside of a mead or a wine to be able to bring some of those flavors out. And you can get that into whatever you're making. So that's more what I'm saying when I'm saying like I would cook something like that. Like I want that flavor of that cooked thing in there.
Hmm.
Like same thing with like a bananas Foster. Like you're roasting the banana when you do something like that. And you're caramelizing some of those sugars, and you're changing them, and they're not as fermentable. Some of the sugars won't be fermentable, but that's okay. You're not doing the whole thing. You're just doing some of them. And so I'm trying to get some of that change. That was one of the ideas that I had for the banana wine that I did was that I wanted to get some of those sugars to change there. So I'm hoping that when it comes around to it, that that's the way that'll turn out, is that it actually has some changed sugars in it. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, I get exactly what you want, but I guess my argument is that's not really the way you get some of those flavors. So you can absolutely like invert a fruit, and if you put the whole fruit in there, some of that flesh will have its own flavors from its own reaction, because it essentially goes through the Maillard reaction just like anything else. You know, it browns, it changes its compost. Some of it will caramelize, some of it will Maillard the outside, depending on how you're cooking it. But that inverted sugar is a defined product that's 100% fermentable. You're not going to get any flavor from that sugar the same way you don't get any flavor from a lot of additive sugars if you do it in the initial brew. That's like what separates mead from other alcohol brews, because the sugar in mead isn't, as honey, fully fermentable. So some of it'll stick around. But inverted sugars won't. They'll completely get eaten up. So just when you're sitting there trying to say, okay, I want to have some of these flavors in there, what a lot of people will do is make simple syrups to be added in. So that's where you can get some of that like after the fact. I just haven't had too much luck in cooking fruit and expecting it to have the flavor from the sugars in it. You can get the flavors from the flesh, which is, I mean, all well and good. But like if you want to make something that's like an apple pie meat, because I've made one of those before that turned out okay, you know, you're really going in after the initial brew and you're putting in this, like, what I used was like a caramel syrup that had been made with some apple peel to get those oils in it. You can't necessarily put like baked apples into the primary and get much of a baked apple flavor back out.
Let's see what happens with my banana wine because I basically did what you're saying I can't do. And if it ends up having something else that happened with it, maybe we need to explore the science of that a little bit more.
Yeah.
Um,
And I'm not saying you can't do it. Like, it'll be there. You'll get some of it because you're not blowing those bananas away so much with heat that none of their natural sugars are left. It's just you'll get a better, cleaner flavor if you separate those tasks a little bit. At least in the stuff that I've made and the research that I've done.
I mean, that's what I'm saying. But
Yeah.
I'm doing like, this very like I've done it specifically this way. I'll try it a
Hmm.
different way the next time. I'm only doing a gallon of it, so I have that kind of flexibility to do that. So we'll see how that turns out. And probably by the end of this, we'll at least have by the end of the set of podcasts that we do, like on our last recording day, something where I could probably send you a sample of it. It'll be very young, but you could tell me kind of where it is. And it's
Yeah.
probably only going to be around 9 or 10% ABV. I think that's what I've got it set for the banana wine. Yes, about 11% ABV is what it should end up being. If it ferments with what I've got in there right now. It could go up higher, depending on if I add more sugar to it or not. But I may have some that you could try and see how it ended up. I'm imagining it would still be kind of Bernie and young though.
Yeah, it probably
From
would be. But I mean, you can ignore a lot of that when you're just tasting for primary flavors. Like, secondary flavors won't come out as much. But we'll see how much, like, is it banana versus something else?
yeah. So on a complete change, like I've talked to you about this before. My dog Cooper, he had terrible. I think it's called a CCL for
Mm.
his ACL, like tendons in his leg. But he tore his, and we took him to go get his surgery on them earlier this week. And I know, like when we were playing D&D the other day, we kind of talked about it a little bit, but I just want to tell everybody out there, if you got a dog that's like this, just be prepared to carry it everywhere.
Yeah.
He's like 50 pounds, and like he wants to jump up on stuff and everything. He starts like kind of trying to hop and throw himself up, and I'm like, nope, nope, you can't do it. That was way too expensive of a surgery for me to let you tear your
Hmm.
your tendon again, or whatever it is, that ligament that runs through there. Um, so yeah, that was a thing.
Yeah,
So
that's always so hard with dogs because Puppins had like a more permanent issue when she was with us, and dogs just don't get it. Like, they have the resolve. They're like, I know this hurts, but I'm still me. I'm still going to do all this stuff,
right.
and you gotta watch them to make it stop. And thankfully, Copper's going to get better, and Cooper's going to get better, and you know, and I'm looking forward to him running around again. Because when they lose that mobility, especially if it's in like something that can't be ignored, like a back leg as much,
Hmm.
it's hard.
Well, he's already running now. Like we can't stop him from running. He's
Hmm.
not supposed to, but he'll get up and like run across the house. So we're not letting him go outside and run any because it
Yeah.
has to be on like level ground. But we can't stop him from running in the house. And sometimes he'll even like jump off of stuff. Like I'll pick him up and I'll put him on the ottoman in the middle of the living room, and he'll just like something will happen at the door and he'll just jump off of it. Now he's on pain medicine, so it helps to dull some of that stuff, but he is just like ready to go now. Now that he's instantly more active on that leg, even with it being hurt than he was before. And it doesn't make the best thing is anytime he puts weight on it, it doesn't make the popping noise that it was. It made a noise that sounded like plastic popping over the last like 2 months, 3 months. It
Hmm.
started right after we were in lockdown. But he'd go up the stairs and just be like click, 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 click every hop that he made up the stairs. It was quite terrible, very worrying. So um, yeah, I'm glad it's done. I'm glad that he is finished, and so hopefully uh, he'll be he'll be better off. Um, yeah,
Yeah.
that's what I'm hoping anyway. But I got about 2 months ahead of me of carrying him places and doing stuff. He gets the cone of shame off though in like a week and a half. So I'm so looking forward to that. That
Hmm.
cone is annoying. He can't quite get into his bowl, so like he puts his head over it, and it's like he's got like some sort of like weird, like thing over the bowl. It's strange. It just looks weird. I'll have to send you a picture of it at some point. But he's sitting there, he's just munching away. Same thing with like his water. It's crazy. Um, yeah. So, got anything else you want to say about that?
No, no, I think we touched it pretty well.
All right, cool. Well, then, in that case, this has been the 13th episode of season 3 of the Beer and Broadband podcast. Like I said, it's supposed to come out September 14th if I remember to post it appropriately. Otherwise, we will catch you the next time. Have a great day and a good week, hopefully.